Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Betsy Fisher-Martin, the Executive Director of the Women in Politics Institute at American University, and welcome to our special post-debate Thursday edition of our virtual series, Women on Wednesdays. To those of you new to one of our events, WPI is a nonprofit and nonpartisan institute in AU's School of Public Affairs that aims to close the gender gap in political leadership. And we offer academic and practical campaign training, and we facilitate research and discussions like this one on women in politics. So tonight, we're excited to have with us an all-star panel of women to discuss the many different aspects of the historic VP debate last night between Kamala Harris and Mike Pence. Candy Crowley, who you recognize, now happily retired from a long and successful career in television news. She was, of course, the chief political correspondent for CNN, as well as the host of their Sunday show, State of the Union. And in 2012, she moderated the town hall debate between Obama and Romney. So we will talk to her about that. Kasie Hunt is with us, and she has covered Kamala Harris for several years in the Senate from her spot as the Capitol Hill correspondent for NBC News. And she hosted a weekly show on MSNBC that I loved called KCDC, but now she has taken over as the anchor for the aptly named Way Too Early show, which leads into Morning Joe in the morning at the ungodly hour of 5 a.m. So, Kasie, and this is probably your best time right now. So, we really appreciate
it's the very end of the day.
You being here for that. And also helping us out and putting everything in political context is Karen Finney, who is a Democratic strategist and MSNBC analyst. She has more than 20 years experience working in national, CNN now, excuse me.
You're MSNBC
weekly. She has more than 20 years in national politics, including 4 presidential campaigns, the Clinton White House, and of course, serving as the communications director for the DNC. So thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. Before we start, I want everybody to know that we are going to save some time for questions. So on the bottom of your screen, you will see an Ask the Question button. So please send in your questions during the course of our conversation. And you can also upvote other people's questions that you may be interested in as well. And if you miss any of our discussion or want to share it with friends, there'll be a full replay available right after we wrap up. And it'll be at the same link that you use to register. So with that, Candy, Kasie, and Karen, welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So Kasie, let me start with you. As I mentioned, you have covered Senator Harris on the Hill for many, many years. How do you think she did last night in front of really what had to be the biggest audience of her career?
Yeah, it really was the biggest stage for her. And I think for those of us who have watched her, and forgive me if you hear banging in the background, my son is awake, banging on a little piano, so I apologize in like the age of COVID. So I think, there was a big question about whether she was going to and how she was potentially going to rise to the occasion, because we have seen she has had really a meteoric rise in politics. She has taken a very methodical path to where she is now. She, when you get to know her a little bit behind the scenes, you realize, she very much knows where she wants to go. She has a plan for how to get there, and she has applied that every step along the way. And I've sort of been there and been lucky enough to be able to kind of observe how she did that when she first came to Washington as a senator. She, spent time courting the national media and was very careful initially in the hallways, for example, about figuring out getting her feet under her in terms of how to talk to the press. And I think you saw that in her presidential campaign as well. And she had a lot of very strong moments, and she had some missteps. She would have planned debate stage moments, and then sometimes the next day she would struggle to explain her policy position. Medicare for All is one example of this. So I think there was a question, for her, was on this stage, was she going to be nervous? Was she going to be thrown off at all? Or was she going to be able to deliver at a level that we know she's able to? And I think certainly the sense from the people that I've talked to, Democrats on Capitol Hill and people in the Biden campaign in the last day, is that they feel like she really rose to the challenge and that she did very well. And as Karen and Betsy and Candy all know more than anyone else, women are judged differently than men on stages like this. And so the way that she dealt with the interruptions from Mike Pence, I think, was in many ways, a new and different approach than we've seen in the past from women. She pushed back against him. She didn't hesitate from that. She did it with a smile. Perhaps we will get to a point where, we're not, or voters are not looking at a demeanor like that and saying, well, you have to be nice when you tell somebody not to interrupt me. But, I think it's clear, certainly from my reporting, that they thought a lot about that and that she executed well.
Yeah, I mean, I thought in many ways too, she stuck up for herself, and she, when she wasn't getting equal time, she said it, and she sort of, demanded that she have equal time. And at the end of the day, they did the math on the timing, and both of them had just about the same amount of speaking time in the debate. Karen, let me ask you, how do you think she's feeling today, and sort of what are the reactions inside the campaign? I know you're close with a lot of folks that work on the campaign, and what are you hearing from sort of inside there?
I think she's feeling really good, obviously relieved, because one of the things that people forget, right? When you are the VP challenger, you have to know 4 people's records, right? You have to know yours. She had to know Pence and Trump and Biden, and actually the Obama Biden record, because there was an expectation, and we saw it come, that some of the attacks would actually be about the Obama Biden record. So a lot of studying and hard work, and as Casey said, a lot of thinking about the optics and the dynamics of this historic moment as a Black woman, as an Indian American, Asian American woman on this stage. And look, the reality for women is we have to navigate these spaces very differently and thread these needles very differently. And as a Black woman, she was very aware not to be the angry Black woman. And so, as Casey pointed out, you do it with a smile, you do it with a, and really trying to figure out. And look, I think there were moments that she strategically kind of let it go, because again, you have to be mindful that how much of your time do you want to spend correcting and stopping versus, just saying, all right, I'm just going to go to my next point and I'm going to let this one go. And so I think in terms of that part of the plan, she executed it beautifully. I think she also proved herself that she is more than capable of stepping into the job of president, if that should be the case. And most importantly, I think, she was able to do something that unfortunately, was not possible in the train wreck of last week. That if you want to call it a debate, we can call it that. There actually was an opportunity to get to talk some substance and to talk some policy. And I thought the most effective thing, frankly, and they felt good about this. I mean, bad for the country, good in terms of pressing the point, COVID. I mean, it was front and center in the debate. It was that plexiglass, frankly, was another character. That and the fly, right, were 2 other characters that were really part of the debate, and it was unmistakable. And I think she did a good job of pressing that point and really had some good moments. I think she felt good about speaking directly to the camera and trying to talk directly to the American people, which is very hard to do. When you prep people for that, you practice it. It doesn't always come off well, and I think she actually did it quite well. So they're feeling good. The campaign is feeling good. Obviously not taking anything for granted with 3 weeks to go.
Right. But she did what she had to do.
Yes, 100%. She did exactly. And she did what she needed to do. And folks feel really good about that. Yeah.
So Candy, you probably, like me, like the former journalist and me, just at some point wanted just to reach through the TV screen and say, answer the question.
Fully expecting they wouldn't. So I mean, who's surprised here? I mean, it's nice when you have as much time as you could possibly want, because you can sit there in the chair and going, but that really wasn't my question. But that really wasn't my question. I mean, I think, look, she did answer some questions, but on the other hand, she had less to defend than he did. He had a heck of a lot to defend. So obviously he's off wanting to talk about the things he wanted to talk about. She had really one mission, and that's to say to the nation, I could be president if that should become necessary. That's I mean, that's her mission last night. She may have said all those things with a smile. I'm not sure she felt them with a smile. And I think that was also,
we don't always.
I think women understood that. And I think if you followed a lot of the commentary, that was it was evident to a lot of people that the smile mask, come on. And it was clearly how they had decided she was going to react.
Right.
When she was interrupted. They clearly had said, okay, here's what you do. You say, I'm speaking. I
Yeah.
did wonder if the situation were reversed, and I honestly don't have an answer to this, but if the situation were reversed and she had interrupted him and he had turned to her and said, "I'm sorry, I'm speaking," how that would have come across. Right? I mean, I think it would have come across as condescending, whereas with her saying it, it was like, I'm sorry, I'm speaking here, right? And so it was, so that it can cut both ways.
Yeah.
And so I thought they handily took care of that. She kept it on coronavirus, and she said, "Yeah, I can walk and chew gum, and I know the issues, and I can step in if this man who will be 78 years old in January, should he become president, I am a worthy second."
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit, Candy, too, about the role of the moderator, you having lived through this.
Yeah.
And like the frustration that we all had on, the not able to follow up. And I think some people were criticizing Susan Page, our colleague from USA Today, for not doing sort of those follow-ups.
Right.
But as you and I both know from our experience with the commission, there's a very strict set of rules, and she may not have been able to kind of take that to the next level and press on this follow-up.
And by the by, the commission talks to both campaigns. Both campaigns, go back and say, "No, I need the podium to be higher. I want, a fan. I need 3 minutes. No, I want 4." So this is, Karen can tell you, this goes on,
Oh, yeah.
Forever, right? So by the time you get it, like every second is spoken for, because what the commission wants is these 2 people on the stage. Okay.
Yes.
So they, they say, here's what they've agreed to. And everybody, whoever does that, knows that they're not going to, that's not going to last, right? Of course they're not going to do it. They're going to say, eat what time you can, get this message out, keep saying it. That's exactly what they all go to do, whether the Democrat or the Republican. If you're the moderator, first of all, it depends on your definition. Like a lot of people think you are a potted plant.
Yeah.
And you ought to go, your turn, your turn, your turn. The problem is if you take someone like Chris Wallace, or like Tim, or Tom Brokaw, or Susan Page, all of whom are reporters, it is against everything in you not to go, wait, that was not the question.
Yes.
It's this, right? So you're constantly sort of seeking that balance, because you can hear people throwing shoes at the screen. There's no doubt about it, because you want to throw shoes yourself, and not in that good way.
That's not the good trouble.
Yeah, that's not good trouble. That's bad trouble. So, you're in a darned if you do and darned if you don't.
Yeah.
But it is so organic. Those, you can say, I'm going to go, and here's the kind of moderator I'm going to be. And you get there, and it is just as it rolls. It's not what you think it's going to be. And it's like I was listening to Chris at one point. He said, well, I thought it was going pretty well. And then I realized, 45 minutes in, oh my gosh, the strategy here is blah, blah, blah. I'm sure Susan, she goes in there having seen the one before, thinking, I'm going to, these guys
take
are
the time, and
I'm going to say, thank you, Mr. President, Vice President, Mr. Vice President. And then it just becomes like, fingernails on a chalkboard,
right?
Because he's going to go over it. So there's no set way to do it, and whatever your plan is going in, it's going to get disrupted by the disruptors.
Yeah, and there's always something.
And guess what? Susan is a grown woman and an incredible reporter, as Chris is, and she's just fine. So
I want to play a little snippet for from your moderating, because you got in the middle of sort of the fact check debate, which I think is another fascinating conversation. But I want to play a little bit of it, because this is going to make all of us sad. But we probably have some students in the audience who were like 10 or 12.
Or not born.
I was going to say, or not born.
When this debate happened in 2012. So let me just play a little snippet so folks can see exactly what happened. And you can explain a little bit of it here. Let's see.
I think it's interesting. The president just said something which is that on the day after the attack, he went in the Rose Garden and said that this was an act of terror.
Whoops.
You said in the Rose Garden, the day after the attack, it was an act of terror. It was not a spontaneous demonstration. Is that what you're saying?
Please proceed, Governor.
I want to make sure we get that for the record, because it took the president 14 days before he called the attack in Benghazi an act of terror.
Get the transcript.
He did in fact, sir. So let me call it an act of terror.
Can you say that a little louder,
Use
Tammy?
the word. He did call it an act of terror. It did as well take 2 weeks or so for the whole idea of there being a riot out there about this tape to come out. You're correct about that.
The administration indicated that this was a reaction to a video and was a spontaneous reaction.
It did.
It took them a long time to say this was a terrorist act by a terrorist group.
So you got stuck in the middle of,
Yes, he
the
did.
fact
No, he
that-
didn't. Yes, he did. No, he didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you said, you were the journalist in you is,
You know, what's funny is it was the moderator in me thinking, let's not get stuck on this axle here, because
Yeah.
we've got all these people waiting to ask questions, and they're going, you did, you didn't, you did, you didn't. He said this,
Right.
no, he didn't. And I wanted to kind of move it along. So I wasn't thinking time to fact check. I was just thinking, can we move on here? So, you know, look, I think the fact checking is, and I've said this 1,000 times, it is a slippery slope. Because guess what? You can't know every fact that comes up in a debate. You just can't. And
Right.
so if you do fact check, then you're going to be criticized for what you didn't fact check. Well, she fact checked him on this, but she didn't fact check her on that. And then they'll add up who you fact checked and who you didn't, and blah, 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 blah. If
Yeah.
you don't fact check, and by the way, 4 years ago, there was a lot of fact checking that went on. I don't know if you noticed that, but I mean, practically every debate had people fact checking Trump in real time. So you know, you're kind of stuck. And as a reporter, you're right. There's a part of you that goes, well, that's not true, but this is. So, you know, it's just, again, that was an organic, moment.
Yeah.
And I reacted to the moment, and, then we moved on. So it's just not as, first of all, easy as it seems. Nor does it ever go the way anybody thinks it's going to go.
Right.
And I do think the time limits and things like that make it really difficult to get to any point which I think is actually what the candidates want.
Right.
But it also just makes it difficult to hone in on something.
Yes, for sure. I had Martha Raddatz come and speak to one of my classes this year about this topic too. And she said, for the moderator, it's like prepping and taking the SATs in front of 84 million people.
Right. Right.
Super hard to do. Karen, let me ask you though, on that notion of fact checking, there was leading up to the debate, some reporting about the prep inside the Harris, campaign, saying that he was likely going to skip the fact checking on Pence because voters, seem to punish women who come across as too negative.
Yes.
Do you think that was like a deliberate decision that they just were going to let some of that stuff go?
Yeah, well, there's a couple parts to it, right? Number one, so it's interesting listening to Candy talk about how the moderator preps, when you're prepping someone for a debate, I mean, part of where you start with the premise is you have X amount of speaking time, and you've got to make the most of that time. And then you decide what are the key points we know you have to make you're likely going to get this number of minutes by the time your opponent answers and the question's asked, right? So it's, and obviously in this one, she had a lot more time to talk than she did in some of the primary debates in the Democratic primary when there's 10 people on stage. So part of one calculation is how much of your time do you want to spend fact checking when that's time you're not talking about here's our criminal justice plan that does boom, boom, boom.
Right.
Right. So that's one calculation. The other calculation, and again, this goes to what we were talking about before, the sort of doing it with a smile and sort of in some instances, letting some things go. Women are judged, as I mentioned, on likability, right? Our trustworthiness on likability. We are also, we constantly have to credential ourselves. That's part of why we assume, when men enter a race, we assume that they're qualified. Women have to talk about their qualifications. It's one of the reasons in 2016 we kept saying Hillary Clinton would have been the most qualified person we'd ever had as president because of her qualifications. So,
right.
But part of it is you have to so one of the dynamics you're having to think about is, okay, likability means I've got to be warm and engaging and bring people in, but I've also got to be tough and I've got to be firm and I've got to pick my spots and decide, again, that negativity, if you don't want to come off as sort of carping, like, well, he's not telling the truth, and sort of, and again, to what you said, so I think there was some decisions made about how to both handle misinformation or disinformation, and sort of, you tend to make some agreements around certain completely outrageous, egregious, like if you would have brought up Burisma, for example, I think you would have seen a much firmer, hold on, that's not right. That's when you have to go in. So you have to make those kinds of decisions. And then some decisions about, well, there are places where we'll let it go because the fact checkers will do their job. And my job is to, use the time to press our case about what we're going to do. And at the same time, again, I have to keep coming back to this. The racial dynamic in this is also very important. As a Black woman, we don't get to have the same range of emotions, frankly, publicly. It sucks, but it's true, that white women do. And so there is we are aware of that. There is a reality to that, and how we express ourselves around that it is all part of, how you think about how people are going to perceive the information. And frankly, you want to make sure that as the messenger, your attributes are not getting in the way of the channel of communicating your message. And so that all of those things go into that.
Like there was one point in the debate too, where, Pence had that sort of low blow about plagiarism. Right. And she sort of let that go. I think she made a face or something, right? It's just not worth it.
Right. And it goes also to something. I mean, I thought, for example, there was an exchange around fracking that was starting to get so in the weeds that I just thought, oh God, make it stop. Because most people right now do not care about fracking. They care about COVID and the economy. And, they were sort of pressing the point. I thought, oh my gosh, if we get into, this too far deep into this, you're going to lose people.
Right.
But so, that's the other reason, right, is it's like, in some instances, trying to fact check is going to take you down a rabbit hole that's just not even worth it.
Yeah. Casey, let me ask you about sort of covering Kamala Harris during the primaries and what we saw in those debates. And of course, she was criticized, and it potentially hurt her campaign when she went after Biden in the primary debates. Did you think that her performance was much different, and that maybe there were some things she learned along the way there?
Well, my sense is that the performance aspect of it actually was a big success, in that she set up, she thought about what she was going to do, and she really did execute. The risk, of course, was that there are all of these personal dynamics between her and former Vice President Biden, and it really did seem to put her selection as the vice presidential nominee into jeopardy. But the fact that ultimately they gave her the slot says that, perhaps to me anyway, that was worth the risk. And, there was a lot of, reporting during the selection process that kind of focused on, well, there were some people in Biden's camp who thought that this was an unfair hit and that it meant that she couldn't be loyal to him and all of these things. And then there were questions about that from Kamala Harris's camp and from others, particularly women, who said, would you really be saying that about a male candidate who landed a good hit on your guy? I mean, it's not as though Barack Obama and Joe Biden didn't go at it in the primary back in 2008. And ultimately, Obama selected Biden as his former vice president. So, I do think she may have learned some lessons about how you fight with your friends, which is what a Democratic debate is. It's much different than a one-on-one in a general election setting. And I think they certainly, she obviously she didn't win the nomination, so she made some mistakes in her presidential campaign. I think they know that. I think there was some surprise that she didn't actually last longer in the campaign, considering all of the hype, frankly, and excitement about her candidacy from the outset. And she hired a lot of good people. There was a lot of investment in her. And, I think the people that did work for her came out of it feeling like, she has the potential to go all the way potentially, but she wasn't ready at that point. And I think, anyone who's run for president will tell you, you think you might know what it's like. You might think you want to do it, and you do it, and there's just nothing to compare it to. And even those of us who have seen a million campaigns, or not a million, but, several campaigns, Candy has covered many of them, as have you, Betsy. I mean, you just, until you're the candidate, you just have no idea what it's like to be in that space. And so from that perspective, it never hurts to get the experience of running, because at least she went through that crucible of the primary that she can now apply in this. And I think you saw that come out on the stage last night.
Yeah, Candy, let me ask you, because there was a funny discussion on Twitter about after the Trump Biden debate, how, you know, in 2016, speaking of Hillary Clinton, you know, she must have certainly been itching to tell Trump to shut up, man. And then Hillary Clinton replied on the tweet and said, "You have no idea."
Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, looking back at that race, you know, those gender dynamics at play where Biden can get away with saying, "Shut up, man." But had Hillary been the one to say it, would have been a totally different game.
It would have, for several reasons.
Yes.
The primary one being, you know, she's female. That
Yeah.
comes across as harsh and all of that. But also because Trump wasn't as well known in terms of his personality and what he's going to do and what he might say or do about a pandemic or,
Yeah.
you know, whatever. So, I mean, you know, I think the circumstance of it, I mean, even I thought the clown thing and the shut up thing were kind of mistakes, but the truth is, I really feel like Joe Biden would have to fall down and, you know, have some sort of catastrophic thing happen for this to not, I mean, and which he didn't in his debate. She certainly didn't in her debate. This is about him.
Mhm.
This is about Donald Trump. And so the vice presidential debate went, you know, and it was interesting and it was all those things, but it's still about President Trump. And in the end, I'm not sure that the debates, and I'm not sure there's really a historic reason to believe that the debates move things one way or the other. And I think that remains true looking at
Yeah.
this.
It's interesting because while it may not move things, CNN did one of their after polls, and we saw this, you know, gender gap in how people perceived who the winner was, where
Right.
Yeah.
women last night saw Kamala Harris as the winner. I think it was like 70-30, and men was more evenly split, like 48-46, in terms of who they actually thought won the debate.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it'll be interesting to see. I would to save those numbers. And this is a flash poll.
Yes,
You know, flash
of course,
polls have
yeah. Yes.
their drawbacks, but
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see. Like right now, the male vote, as far as I recall, is pretty split as it is. When overall male vote, obviously
Yes,
with African Americans and with people Latina background, it's more on the Biden side. But in general, men overall, I think there's maybe a 1 or 2 point difference. With women, it's like some crazy differential at this
Yes.
point. And I wouldn't be surprised if what you're seeing in that flash poll isn't reflected in the polls.
Right.
Because
people have their
I think
team
you're
jersey
looking
on.
at people
Yeah.
people who are watching generally have made up their mind. I don't think they're looking at the debates thinking, which one of these people am I going? I think they're looking to cheer their guy on or their woman on and
Yeah.
decide that they did a great job.
But I will say, you know, I've been doing a lot of polling and focus group work recently, and with women's white college-educated suburban women, many of whom voted for Trump. And I think part of what the debate, both the Trump-Biden debate and even last night's debate did for those women, it re-solidified that feeling that they've been having, that they're just exhausted of it.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
just
No. I agree.
tired,
I
right?
agree. But I think that's
And-
been showing up in the polls all along, and this just
Yeah.
went. Oh yeah, I remember now.
Yeah, I mean, it has been. And yet when you talk to some of these women, they're still like, wow. And it's interesting because they don't blame, and these sort of moderate voters in general, people who are on the fence, they don't blame President Trump for COVID, which I think is perfectly fair. His handling, obviously, is the issue. And so I think part of what we saw was, you know, again, there was not, you know, I guess it's questionable whether or not anything Pence could have said could have made a huge difference. But again, I personally think if he'd had a stronger answer on COVID, it might have helped a little bit, because that is where they're really suffering. And instead, it was the same talking points that we've heard. And I think the gender dynamics, the way it ended up playing out with the interruptions and what have you, and the way we saw that differential in the way men and women viewed, you know, who won last night, again, that is how it's showing up in the polls, and that is how it's showing up in how people talk about their frustration about Trump. I mean, a lot of these women will say things like, I voted for him because I thought he would shake things up, but this isn't what I meant. This isn't how I.
Not quite like this, right?
This ain't it, right?
Yeah.
But so for those people who might have been watching, yes, it is almost part of a permission structure, again, to say, you know what, you to kind of reinforce your gut that says,
Right.
yeah, I don't think I can do that again this time. And I think that's to my mind, it's that very slim margin, and that's what may matter in these debates.
I don't know, Casey, did you get the feeling? I sort of looked at it last night and I thought, okay, Pence, vice president, has in a lot of ways an audience of one, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
And,
Yeah.
And you knew it.
and the audience that comes with that audience of one.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing to go into 2024 with. And I just wondered if this debate for Pence was more about that than about 2020.
Well, certainly, I think there's a lot of speculation about that for sure. And, it's Mike Pence has clearly made the decision that whatever his future is going to be, it's going to be about what we experienced under Donald Trump. I mean, he's become sort of the consummate defender of Trump, if one who wears a more polite veneer. But yeah, I mean, he was absolutely saying many of the same things that Trump says, defending, his record on coronavirus, just in a way that is completely different. And that, I think, is certainly the race for 2024 is already well underway in the Republican Party. I mean, there are, I could list a half a dozen Republican senators that are thinking more about that and their own posturing for that than they are, about basically anything else right now, because there is kind of this widespread assumption that, the future is not going to be, it's going to be different from what we're experiencing now because things are so dire. Now, we have to issue the caveat that going into the 2016 election, all those same people who now think Trump is going to lose thought he was going to lose then. But I do think we're all seeing, it's hard to ignore kind of the fundamentals and the realities that we're seeing in the polling this time and feel like there is not a major problem for Trump going into the election.
But so, Casey, coming back to 2020 here, I haven't looked on Twitter in the last hour, so this may have changed. But what is the latest on the next debate and whether that's going to happen? The latest I saw was that Trump is refusing to do it virtually, and that the commission came out this morning and said they were going to do it virtually. Trump says no. Biden's going to do his own separate town hall on ABC. Like, what's going on? And do you think we'll see another Trump Biden debate?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it could be out of date in the next handful of minutes. So just
We're 6:35
at this very minute.
Right.
Mike Pence, they felt like he had a good debate last night. And of course, the president woke up this morning and, here we are. And he sort of stepped all over that, whatever that news cycle was going to be about Mike Pence, to talk about this, which is that he doesn't want to do this debate virtually. As you mentioned, it sounds like Joe Biden has agreed to do a town hall. In place of it, they have said, the Trump campaign has suggested, well, we should just bump them all by a week. We'll do the one that was supposed to be next week, the following week, and then we'll add another one the week right before Election Day. And the Biden campaign says, no, we agreed to 3, on the dates that we said in October. The third one is already one of the latest in the calendar in the history of presidential debates, essentially. And obviously, candidates get very protective of their time in those final hours and days, and prepping for a debate takes a lot of time and effort. So saying I'm going to be off the campaign trail for that last week so that I can prepare for a debate is a big wrench to throw at anyone. And the reality is, President Trump's White House has been holding events the way they have, and they've had a coronavirus outbreak because of the way they've handled the safety protocols. So Biden's team is saying, well, that's how this has worked out. These are the ones we've agreed to. We'll be there for the ones that we've agreed to. So it seems like at this point, more likely than not, that we will see a debate not next week, but the following week, that what will be that third debate. There is some question about the format because Biden's team is saying they want the town hall format that Steve Scully was going to host. NBC's Kristen Welker is supposed to be hosting that third debate in the format that we saw with Chris Wallace. So I think that's one outstanding question.
So Karen, what do you think the Biden campaign should do about this? I mean, should they just like Casey said, stick to what was agreed to, knowing that they have sort of come out of that first debate in a pretty good place?
Yeah, 100%. Look, I mean, at this point, they have a plan for what has to happen for them over the next 3 weeks. And it's, as Casey pointed out so rightly, coming off, they're already, Senator Harris is going to lose several days because of the hearings for Amy Coney Barrett.
Yeah.
So that's one piece. Because remember, at this point, we are talking about elections are won on, it's a game of inches, and it is very targeted to where you've got to go and what voters you've got to be talking to. And a debate is not necessarily the most effective way to do that, right? So between now and election day, they have their plan. They know what they need to do and who they need to be talking to. And a debate is not necessarily, that's part of that plan, but a deviation, particularly the closer you get to election day, is not something that you want to have to factor in if you don't have to, right? It's one thing if, natural disaster or something should happen. So, to my mind, I think they should absolutely stick to their plan and stick to their guns. And I think the idea of trying to, if it's brilliant. Remember in the primaries in 2015, I guess it was 2016, there was a Republican primary debate that Donald Trump didn't want to participate in, so he went to his own event instead. He did counter programming,
and then
I regretted doing that.
Right. So why not go do that if you are Vice President Biden, and again, stay focused on what you need to do to win this race, and you have maintained your commitment. The last thing I would add is, look, there is not a single reason to believe that President Trump will change his behavior and act any more responsibly. So, we don't know because we're not getting really much information. Is he still contagious? Is it even safe? Will he still be contagious in 2 weeks? We don't know. And so I think it's perfectly reasonable to also say we want to make sure some of those things are in place. I'm frankly one who believes it's not just about the health and safety of the candidates. It's about everybody else that they come into contact with.
Right.
So I think those are all very serious, very real conversations to be having. The fact that yesterday, is the last thing I'll say on this, going into the debate, that the Pence team was still grousing about having the plexiglass on the stage.
I didn't get that.
Was obscene. And then, Karen Pence comes up on stage without her mask. It's ridiculous that these are the things we're fighting about. And so I think there's nothing wrong with taking every precaution from a safety perspective, particularly with a president who has been so blatantly irresponsible.
So we have a bunch of questions I want to go to, but I want to take advantage of Casey's expertise on the Hill to ask one other Hill question. Nancy Pelosi came out today and sort of teased that, saying that come tomorrow, everybody, because we're going to talk about the 25th Amendment. What's going on there?
Well, we're trying to figure that out, Betsy. They want to talk about the succession and the power of the presidency. I think that the question that we've been trying to get answered is, what are the political reasons for her to do that? Does it have to do with the fact that there's a lot of clamor from, the base and concern about what might happen, and the president continues to refuse to answer this question about a peaceful transfer of power, and his doctors also, continue to not give us any information really about the actual state of his health and what kind of role that has to play. So stay tuned is what I would say. I'm not sure that there's a lot that they can do, but she certainly has been focused on laying the groundwork for any scenario. I think, all of us, on the one hand, have historically had faith in our systems and in our elections, and that the outcomes will be trusted. But also we've experienced the last 4 years, a lot of things I don't think any of us ever thought we would see. And the Canadian Prime Minister today said, well, we're preparing for all outcomes and contingencies. I think everyone across the world is hoping that, there's a clear outcome on November 3rd, but I think would be, everybody feels like it would be malpractice to not at least have some semblance of a plan in the event that something unpredictable happens.
Interesting. Okay. Let me go to a couple questions. Here's one from a former student of mine, Bilal. He says, do you think that Senator Harris is facing the same or similar attacks that Hillary Clinton faced during regarding her abilities as a woman, or at least the attacks that men don't face? And then he says, Trump brought up stamina in 2016. Do we see similar attacks on Harris. Karen, what do you think of that?
I don't think we're not really seeing stamina, but yes, I mean,
Yeah.
look, these attacks on women and women in politics are not new. I mean, Hillary Clinton, having worked for her for quite a number of years, I can say I think as she was sort of the tip of the spear for women in a lot of ways and took a lot of the heat for a lot of women. I don't think you would have a Kamala Harris without a Hillary Clinton and frankly without a Barack Obama. But I think, look, it is what they are facing and what they are being hit with. This is, not unsimilar to we have a record number of women who were elected in 2018 who are on the ballot in 2020. And no doubt they are facing some of the very same kinds of questions. And there's a lot of great research that's been done on, again, perceptions of women candidates and around leadership, around honest and trustworthiness, around, various issues. And sort of, I think one of the things that is so important, I'll end with this, about Senator Harris, I hope people feel this way, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, the more women who are in elected office, the more women who bring their lived experiences to decision-making tables, I think the better that is for all of us. Because that is a different kind of lived experience than men. And in this instance, particularly as a woman of color, as the daughter of immigrants, as someone who was raised by a single mother, I think she brings a lot to the table. And a number of the women senators have, I'm sure Casey's heard them, and really interesting stories about how having been, a teacher or having been a nurse or their various backgrounds that they bring to their role in Congress. And that I think that's important. And I think better decisions get made. So yes, it's not new. It will continue, but I think it helps little by little to change the face of power and to get Americans more comfortable with women in positions of power.
There's a group that you're doing some work with called Vote for Her. And you guys have done some internet ads and some other things. Tell us a little bit about that project and what you hope to do with that.
Sure. So the goal of that, there were in anticipation that there would be a woman, because Vice President Biden said some time ago that he was going to name a woman. And then when it became clear that it was going to likely to be a woman of color, a Black woman, the idea was to kind of create, a coalition, if you will, of women's organizations and women to support this woman candidate and to help push back on the sexism and the racism. The fact that, we were having conversations in the Veep stakes about, whether or not Kamala was someone who would rub people the wrong way or she was too ambitious, right? I don't remember anybody saying that Paul Ryan was too ambitious, right? Right. So the idea was, let's push back on some of that. And part of the way we have to do that, and part of the way we move women in politics forward, and I think this is true in any industry, we have to call it out. And sometimes you need people who are on the outside, not the candidate themselves, not within the campaign themselves, to call it out and to be able to say, hey, this is happening, this is racist, this is sexist, this is a trope, and to be able to, do some identification around that. One of the things we just did is we put out a video today that showed the 43 times that Mike Pence was interrupting both Susan Page and Senator Harris. And I think it's pretty stark when you realize how many times it really was. So that's the goal, is to try to, unify women behind this woman and really have her back and lift her up and help make sure that we get the correct information out there about her and break through the tropes.
And I know, Casey, you've been out front a lot on actually calling out, within the media when you've seen things, that are, sexist or misogynist in the world of the media happening.
Yeah, I find it frustrating, frankly, and it's I think we're having kind of a broader conversation this year in the media. A lot of it is centered on Black Lives Matter, and I don't want to take away from that by any stretch. But the conversation about what is objectivity, what does it mean to make sure that you're playing the role that you're supposed to play. And I was a classically trained journalist, I guess is what you would call it. I grew up in the AP, right? So that's a very straightforward.
I call that capital J journalist. Yeah.
And so sometimes, I struggle to find the balance that I feel comfortable with on this score, but, I feel like I've experienced it enough, and I've watched how, I've learned from many, many people over the course of my career, thankfully many women, but also I've watched men do the job. And, you try it sometimes when you're young to emulate what they're doing and sort of realize that, there are people that are holding women candidates to a different standard. And I certainly would be frustrated if roles were reversed to be held to that different standard. And so I just feel like we have a responsibility to apply, as, Karen said, the lived experience that you have, and to say, no, this is not, my sort of favorite example is Sherrod Brown, who I know well and who I cover. And, and I have good relationships with people on both sides of the aisle. So this is not a partisan comment, but I really like covering him. He's a lovely person. And people think his gravelly voice and his mussed up hair are cute. And when he was thinking about running for president, there were all these stories saying, oh, his rumpled appearance, like how charming. Can you imagine if a woman ran with a rumpled appearance and people would write about her? It's hard to wrap your head around. And that's not a knock on him by any stretch, but it's just an example where, I feel like, you can look at the positive coverage and the way that men use things to their advantage that women don't have. Now, I also think the point about interrupting that Candy made earlier is a good one. And, we all do have to remember, and, I think many people will apply this in their own professional lives regardless, but especially if they have public facing roles, there are things you have available to you as a woman that as a male candidate, you probably don't. And we all have to be cognizant of those dynamics as well. But the reality is the system has been built and set up by, people who played by a certain set of rules and had rules for entry and rules for, kicking people out of their system. And, I think we're all kind of going through this reckoning about what does that mean? What does that look like? How do we make sure that we're being, that our definition of objective and fair and unbiased is something that's also inclusive for everyone.
So Candy, I put you in that capital J journalist category, but as you have said, it can now sort of watch from afar of coverage, right? What do you think in terms of media coverage out there that may be sexist or unfair, and the notion of kind of calling that out?
Well, obviously, I also grew up in the AP, so it's listen, there's a long way to go.
Yeah.
And you can see things like I think, and not just in politics, in media. In who's on the air, who's not on the air, who's in not just everywhere, in the corporate boardrooms, in the whatever. This is a long haul fight. I think the good thing is I loved last night, and I was like so off on this, how many men decided that Pence was mansplaining.
Right.
And I did, they love that word, right? I thought, okay, I'm kind of like, Senator Harris. I don't want men telling me what mansplaining is.
Mansplaining.
Right. Yeah, a man mansplaining what mansplaining is. And I actually didn't see that. I didn't catch that. I'm sure someone felt that. I just didn't. I thought this is just go out there and keep talking. I just saw it like a debate strategy. I didn't see mansplaining exactly. I don't know what the senator thought about it, but so I think the idea that we're now clicking on light bulbs everywhere, right? That we're saying, wait, when you hear this is code for that. I think that's progress, but it's gonna, it takes a while, and it takes a while in politics, and it takes a while in journalism, and it takes a while in the corporate boardroom. And I wish it would happen tomorrow, Or Lord, I wish it would happen before I died. So
baby, we're getting there. Baby steps.
Yes, we're getting there. Let's see. Here's a question from Isabel. Are there areas in Senator Harris's debate performance in which you feel that she could have responded better? Let me ask Candy and Casey that. Karen, you don't count because you have on your jersey.
I thought her response to have you had a conversation? I thought both of their responses, by the way, but I thought her response, because this was, I think, most important for her, to the question of have you had conversations with Joe Biden about a transfer of power, if anything should happen, and how that would work and what you would think. Okay, she went with her bio, and that's fine, but I wanted a more direct, look, we get it. He's, I'm sure they don't want to. It reminded me a little bit of when Bob Dole ran, and he had a birthday that came up, and he's young compared to what's going on now. But every time we'd go someplace, they'd bring out a birthday cake, and his press secretary would jump in front of it so they couldn't get shots of it. So this sort of reminds me of it. So I'm sure they don't want to talk about how old Joe Biden is. I don't think it matters at this point. I think it's that Joe Biden isn't Donald Trump. I think that's his main selling point at this point. And so I think, she should have been stronger on that. But again, I think she was fine overall, getting across the point that she's ready to move into that number 2 slot.
Mm-hmm. Casey, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that stuck out to me was, although, it wasn't a question from the moderator, so in some ways it's a little bit unfair, but the court packing question, she was asked, would you add justices to the court? And she didn't answer that question. Obviously, there were plenty of examples of Mike Pence completely ignoring Susan Page's questions and just, answering different queries than the ones that were put to him.
Which was the irony of him, hitting back at her for that when he had spent the entire debate.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's like a little bit. And I think, I don't know if it was Karen or Candy who mentioned that, I mean, that's a strategy, right? I mean, we can knock them for it, but that they go in there wanting to present a certain set of things. And so it is what it is. But I mean, Joe Biden today was struggling and essentially said, you'll know my answer on court packing after Election Day, which is kind of a confusing thing for any candidate to say when you're running for president. So I think, I mean, that's one of the very few, places where we're talking about the divisions within the Democratic Party. I mean, it's become so much about the referendum on Trump that some of those, divisions and the Biden campaign has done a very good job of papering over them as well. And getting progressives on board. But they're right there under the surface. And this is one of the few topics that has broken through that, I would say.
So Karen, is there anything that you're willing to tell us that you think she could have done better?
Sure.
Okay.
There was the interesting thing about the question of court packing that I will say, or expanding the court, I should do my job appropriately, was, Vice President Pence is the one who posed the question, and then it kind of came as a question. And so at first when she didn't answer, I thought, don't answer his question. You don't have to take that from him. But then obviously we sort of, I get why, I wish that we would just answer the question. I do think it's one that no need to let that become a side issue at this point, frankly. But I understand why, because we know that that's where conservatives want to take it instead of staying focused on, okay, people are voting. Why are we doing this? Mm-hmm. I would have liked to hear her say a little bit more about her. And it was an interesting exchange about her own record as DA. And, Pence tried to throw at her record and the record of sort of Trump and Pence on criminal justice reform, which many of us who are African American kind of roll our eyes at, because it's really, if they really cared about the issue, they could make McConnell take up the Justice and Policing Act right now, and I bet you that would get a lot of people off the streets protesting. However, I thought she could have given a stronger answer. Because it is one of the issues, as Casey probably knows so well, from the primary, where there really wasn't a fulsome conversation about her role as both DA and Attorney General. I think she did last night she tried to weave that into a question about, I'm not going to be lectured to by Vice President Biden on these. And she tried to tick through a bit of what her record was. Yeah. But I think there was a specific charge I would have liked to have heard her just push back on, because again, it is misinformation that's been out there since the primary. But I sort of took that as one of those moments that she just decided, okay, you know what, I'll just take that hit because I gotta get the bigger message out in the time that I have left.
Right. Here's another question for you, Karen. Fast forwarding to 2024, which women do you think we'll be seeing on the debate stage, presidential, vice presidential, or otherwise, sort of the rising stars that are out there for 2024?
Well, of course, as a Democrat, I have to say that since Kamala Harris will likely be running, there won't be any on the Democratic side challenging her. It'll be interesting to see will there be any Republican women who are running. Look, I think the rising stars in our party, there are so many. I mean, Stacey Abrams, I think I don't know that we'll see her running for president. I think her intention is to run for governor in Georgia, but she is certainly someone to keep an eye on. There are a number of women in the House who I think we, got to know a bit through the VP primary, the sort of the Veep stakes process that I think are interesting and we ought to keep an eye on. Tish James, full disclosure, she happens to be my cousin. She is the Attorney General of the state of New York, which is for women, that is one of, that sort of law and order credential is an important credential on the pathway to running for governor.
Right.
And so I think she's definitely someone to keep an eye on. And again, I'm just encouraged by the fact that we have so many more women, this trend, in 2018 and 2020 of more women running. I just think it's good for the country to have, more diversity and more diverse voices and faces putting themselves out there and willing to run for office, because it's, somebody was trying to describe it as, it's like we're going to hang you up by your, fingernails or something. It's just like the hardest, worst thing in the world. But I always admire people who are willing to do it. And I always, part of why I enjoy helping good people win.
Casey, what about you as you cover Congress? Who do you see out there as potential candidates, I guess, for either party, female running in either 2024 or maybe 2028, like Karen says?
Obviously I would have put Harris on.
Yeah.
She's somebody that that really sticks out. Honestly, one person I'm watching on the Republican side is Liz Cheney. I think she has a very long future in the Republican Party. I think I don't know if she's going to run for president. Part of me thinks she might want to be Speaker of the House someday. Instead, but I find her to be very impressive, and she has shown no fear in kind of staking out a position that's different from the Trump camp at a time when it is difficult to do that. And I'm interested to see how that pays off or doesn't pay off.
Yeah. Let's see, our time is coming to an end here. I want to let folks know of some 2 more upcoming Women on Wednesdays that we have over the next 2 weeks. Next Wednesday, we are going to have a discussion on gender and generation. So exploring younger women in politics and the 50 plus women in politics with Nancy Lehman from the AARP and Sarah Guillermo from Ignite and Melissa Beckman, who is a political science professor at Washington College. So they will be here for that. And then the following week, we're going to do a discussion about Republican women that are running in 2020. We just had folks from Emily's List last week. So we're going to have 2 Republican organizations that are working to elect women in politics, Julie Conway from ViewPAC and Rebecca Schuler from Winning for Women. So we're looking forward to having them here to discuss everything, and we hope you will join us for those discussions as well. But I want to thank Candy and Casey and Karen so much for sharing your expertise with us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. This was lovely.
For joining us.
It's an honor to be with you guys.
Okay, take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.